Hello, hello. Welcome to 6 sequencing mistakes, parentheses that we've all made. I'm Lizzie Lasater, and teaching us
Well,
today is
maybe some of us haven't made all of them.
the very humble Judith Hanson Lasater. Hi, Mama.
I know they're not mistakes, they're learning experiences.
Yeah, this was a little bit of clickbait, I will admit it, on my part, naming this session 6 sequencing mistakes. I wanted it to grab your attention, but we definitely are treating this topic, this challenging topic, very lightheartedly. And we admit we've made these mistakes, and we don't even, as moms say, it's really call them mistakes. We're going to start with a grounding minute of meditation from Mom as we get settled, as you arrive here in our class.
So I was kind of frantic with the remodelers coming, and my time got away from me. So I have to admit, I didn't blow dry the back of my hair. So I'm only going to look like this. I'm not going to turn around. The modern yogini. But so for me, for Lizzie, for you, for your students, for the world, let's always remember to do the most important thing first, which is nothing. So I'd like you to imagine that you're the waves at the beach going away from the shore, but in your brain, going inward toward the center of your brain, dropping the chin, settling a little more into the heart. I'll ring my bells. We'll sit for a minute or so. And I don't think of it as meditation. I think of it as remembering presence. And then I'll ring my bells and we'll start. Try to do that practice whenever you can, waiting to pick people up, even at a stoplight for a moment. Whenever you can, find that moment of remembrance, of presence.
We would love you all to find your way into the chat right now and let us know where in the world you're joining from. And I think the chat is turned on. Ooh, everyone. Panelists can chat with everyone. Attendees can chat with everyone. Okay, now it should be turned on. And let us know where you're joining from. Okay. Wow. Everywhere. Going so fast. Okay, hold on. Let me go to the top. British Columbia, Spain, Montana, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, Massachusetts, Portugal, Michigan, Chicago, Venice, San Francisco. Hi, everyone. Okay, and now I have a couple questions before we get officially started. Give a yes in the chat if you've ever taken an online course from us. Any of our Zooms, office hours. Yes, okay.
Repeat offenders.
Lots of friends here. Okay, welcome. And then I would love to know, what is your current relationship with sequencing? In a word, 3 words.
Happy.
Learning, pretty good. Hi, Heidi. Daily practice, learning it, healthy, Iyengar, lost, organic, creative, Favorite yoga topic. Hi, Henry. I agree. I've been urging mom to do a course on sequencing for years, and she's been resisting, but we have finally. Stale. Yeah, very. I hear that. Beginning, grounded, newbie, important, comfortable. Okay, and then last question, just write teacher in the chat if you're a teacher, or student if you're a student, just so we get a little bit of a sense of the balance of who's here. Yeah, lots of teachers. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I would like, with your kind permission, today what we have are 6 key points that we're going to share, the 6 sequencing mistakes, and we're going to talk about them, and then we'll hold some space for questions. If there are no questions, we will do Savasana together. That's our backup plan. We have an hour to spend together. You will automatically receive this recording in the Zoom follow-up email in case you have to leave early. So what I would like to just show at the beginning is let you know about the new course that we've made about sequencing. That's what we're celebrating here today. So I will share my screen with you, and we'll just look very briefly at that and watch a 1-minute video, if you will permit, if you will indulge me, and then we'll get started on today's topic. So if you go to lasater.yoga, that's where our online courses live. And you come to the first course here. It's the magic of sequencing. That's what we're excited about to share today, because it starts on December 6th, next week. So here's a 1-minute video about it that we're going to watch together, if you will permit me.
You should always warm up before your practice.
The poses themselves are the warm-up.
You should do the same poses in the same order every time.
Don't do the same poses in the same order every time.
Back bends need forward bends as a counter pose.
Each pose is complete in itself and doesn't need undoing.
You should always twist to the right first.
It doesn't matter which way you twist first.
You should always practice headstand before shoulder stand.
You should always practice shoulder stand before headstand.
When you're on your period or pregnant, it's all right to practice inversions.
Women should not invert during menstruation and pregnancy. There are a lot of contradictory assertions about the rules of sequencing. We're not interested in those rules.
Instead, we want to teach you principles so you can discover how to structure your practice and your classes for flexibility, relaxation, and integration.
Okay, so that I would love to see in the chat, give a yes if you've heard any of those rules before, the ones that we were going back and forth on, either one way or the other. Like, you should always do headstand first, so you should always do shoulder stand. And I'll show you two more important points about the course I want to share before we get started with today's topic. So this is the course curriculum, which is the 12-week journey that we'll go on together starting on December 6th. The first week is introduction, and then we move through each of these groups of poses. We spend a whole week on each of those. And what that is a concept mom has, which is micro sequencing. So like in the back bend week, we're going to talk about how to sequence back bends, and we'll go deep on each of these weeks on those groups of poses. And there's a practice component within each week. So like if we look at back bends, there's a video about principles, and then there's a practice. You get on the mat and practice with us. And then there's an integration piece each week where we ask some questions, some journaling, bring it full circle. And then after we do those micro sequencing weeks, we have a macro sequencing week on home practice, which is of course the heart of yoga for us. And then a macro sequencing week on teaching a class. So if you're not a teacher, I would say this week 9 is the only week of the entire 12-week course that doesn't apply to you. You can just skip it if you're not teaching, but otherwise we've really designed the course for serious students and teachers. Then, of course, because it's mom, there's a whole week on sequencing restoratives, how to sequence breath, pranayama, and then how to sequence shavasana, what's important about yoga's most important pose. Last thing I'll share about the course is that there are 3 live Zooms. We start on December 6th. There's a video here you can go and watch on your own if you'd like, that shows you more in depth what's inside of the course. And we're offering a big pre-enrollment discount of $108 off when you use this coupon MAGIC. So when you use that, when you enroll at the bottom in the next 7 days, you'll also get lifetime access if you enroll with us soon. So there's 2 options. You can do the monthly payments or the single payment. And in both cases, you'll get the discount. So,
Now wait, if you do the early sign up, then you have lifetime access.
Yes. If you do the early, I know. If you have lifetime access to
I'm not sure if that's a plus or a minus. I know I have to watch that video with those women again.
Okay, I'm putting also the link in the chat right now that has the coupon already applied. So if you click through that link. Okay, definitely a plus. Thank you, Cheryl. You're very sweet. So we're going to start. Let me share my screen. I have another, just because I know some of you are Pitta list people. You want to see, this is, the abstract of the scientific paper. This tells the whole story of what we're doing on today's webinar. We're doing these, you might want to screenshot this. These are the 6 mistakes that we're talking about, and we'll move through them. We'll talk about them. And then I wanted to let you know, if you have any questions about enrolling in the sequencing course, you're welcome to email me directly at lasater.yoga@gmail.com. That comes to me. And just a reminder that that coupon is MAGIC if you want to screenshot this for later. So let's start with number 1, Mom. Always practice Tadasana first. Talk to us about this sequencing rule.
Well, I'd like to give an intro, a little bit of an intro first. Sequencing is like a recipe. When you have a class, there's like a recipe or your own practice. And recipes are not just about the ingredients. It's not just about the asanas, but it's the order in which you combine the ingredients that makes it a recipe. And you were giving an example earlier, Lizzie, to me, which was pancakes.
Yeah, I just made my kids American pancakes for dinner. They're with their babysitter. I have 4-year-old twins. They're out there right now. And I was thinking about how you have to do the dry ingredients first. You put the flour and the salt and the baking powder, and then you add the wet ingredients, the milk and the eggs. And you can't really add the baking powder after you've added the milk. You've got to mix that into the dry ingredients. So there is a sense of sequencing the recipe. It's not just all the ingredients together. You have to do it in order. And it's the same in the practice of yoga.
It's a perfect analogy. Because the asana doesn't create energy in us. It wakes it up. It opens the channels for energy to flow in us, because asana is not just a physical practice. It is deeper practice than just physical. We all know that. So the way you string the pearls on the string makes a difference. But what I want to do in this course, and maybe briefly touch on today, it may come out of me, I'm not sure, is a lot of it has to do with your intention. Where am I going on this journey of my class from 10 to 11:30? Where do I want the student to end up? And what path up the mountain do I want to take to get there? So it has to do with intention and clarity and principles, not rules. So let's do the first one. Tell us, Lizzie, what it is.
Okay, so the first one is always practice Tadasana first. Where do you think that comes from? Where's that idea coming from, and why do you think it's not always a good idea?
Well, I'm not going to talk about where it came from because I don't have much of an idea. I know I was brought up in the Iyengar system, and we often start with Tadasana, but I find that especially evening classes, when people have been busy and living in their minds for all day and driving there, getting on the train there or the subway or whatever, getting to class, Tadasana is too advanced. I've found over the years, especially evening classes, students don't want to just stand there. They're not ready to just stand there. They want to move. and as you remember last summer, Lizzie and I teach at the Feather Pipe Ranch in Montana every summer. And I was teaching it was my week, and I was teaching a class, a morning class, and I got caught up. The way I think of my classes, I think of it an image, a sense of feeling, and awareness, and that how can I, because that's where I am, that's what's opening in me, and how can I express that through this moment with the level of students I have. And so I had kind of a plan, but I'm always willing to go off the plan if the energy moves me in that direction. So it's a living thing, teaching. It's a living thing that you adapt. It's a conversation with your students through asana. And so I was going to do Tadasana, but I kept putting it off. And we did this whole series, I felt was an integrated series. And then at the end, like you put a lot of numbers in a line, or we used to it before we were all ruined. It can't add 2 + 2 anymore because the calculator's on our phone. It's like all the asana, you add up and you get the sum effect. And then what was so fun in that moment was we just stood in Shavasana.
No, Tadasana. We stood in Tadasana.
We stood in Tadasana, and standing Shavasana, that could be an interesting variation. Standing in Tadasana, I found that I didn't feel that I needed to offer people information like move back here, lift this more, drop that, release the shoulder, because they were there. So Lizzie, what was your experience? Because you were a student in that class.
I was taking that class, and I remember there was an emphasis on back bends. So it was well-rounded. We did some standing poses, but the main direction of the class was some building back bends. And then after that opening, when I stood in Tadasana, it felt effortless. That's the word that comes to mind when I remember that class. Just
Tadasana
standing
found
there.
you. Tadasana found you. You didn't try to make Tadasana happen.
Exactly. And I love, just a moment ago when you described Tadasana as advanced. Let us know in the chat if you know what we mean by that, because I think at first that sounds counterintuitive. We think of Tadasana as quite a simple pose. It's probably, I don't know, but it's probably pose number 1 in light on yoga. But there's a lot going on in order for it to become
nothing to
effortless.
go on in your brain. For the brain to reach that balance, I like to think of Tadasana as, mountain pose, as my feet rooted in the earth and my heart yearning for the heavens. And that balance of groundedness and openness. And that came so easily to everyone. They had nice, beautiful lumbar curves. They weren't tucking, they weren't overarching, they were just stable in themselves. And that's because of what came before. You saw this quote, and we'll repeat this many times in our course. The effect of any pose is directly related to the pose that came before it. So each pose is not an isolated island. It's a necklace going together.
I love what Sheila's saying in the chat. There's so many subtleties to that pose. I agree. And also Susan is saying, it makes sense what you're saying about Tadasana. We don't come to stillness easily. I agree. And that's what Mom is saying. When your students, or even when I come to my mat for home practice, I'm like, I'm not really ready for the stillness.
Or the opposite, you're left like a blob. Number 2. Oh, no, number 2 is you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about point number 2, which is believing we need to do all types of poses every time. So I think of that in terms of home practice and in teaching a class. So if I believe that in my home practice, I need to get to every pose, like I need to do standing poses and inversions and back bends and forward bends in every practice, which for me is sometimes 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes. What doesn't make sense about that belief, or what doesn't serve me about that belief in terms of sequencing, is that it doesn't make space for responding to the actual body that I brought to the mat that day. Like, if I have some idea of what the practice must contain every time, it's so rigid, and it doesn't allow for when I'm on my period, or I've just returned from Thanksgiving with mom in Texas and I'm super jet lagged. So maybe my practice today needs to just be legs up the wall, supported bridge pose, and then Shavasana, because that's what my jet lagged bones are really craving. And they don't need Virabhadrasana 2 necessarily today. So that sense of responsiveness, I think letting go of the belief that we have to do every type of the full wheel every time gives us
So,
more fluidity.
and if I may, I really like what you said. I think it also gets caught up with our idea of it's never enough. So we get on the mat and we think I have 20 minutes, but it's not enough. Or sometimes, especially in my youth, before I had children, I'd get on.
When you had time,
I only had an hour, like whatever it was, there was this thought that I wasn't doing enough.
Yeah.
And that pushes you out of your intuitive sense of sequencing. Because often when you've been practicing for a long time and you think you're going in one direction and you get on the mat and it flows in another direction and you have a different sequence. And then I like that because you're having a deep conversation with yourself and you're creating a space of listening, like you were just talking about. What does my body need right now? What sequence does it need? I often do a pose like just a simple back bend over a bolster because I like it. And then I get my head down, my heart open, and then I see what happens after that.
A sense of listening.
You have number 3.
I have more points for number 2. I wanted to say that this belief also that we have to do kind of every pose every time or every type of pose, it makes the yoga mountain too high. And so when I'm thinking about doing a home practice or resisting getting on the mat for home practice, if I believe that the practice has to be so big and complete, then it's just gonna, that belief is great if I don't want to practice. Like it helps make the practice.
It helps you avoid.
You know? So it's like, I'm always trying to find ways in which I can turn mountains, things in my mind, which feel like mountains, into a flight of stairs. It's like, it's not that hard. I can just get on the mat and do one pose. I can just get on the mat and do a simple, or yesterday I did legs up the wall, Viparita Karani supported legs up the wall, and then a bridge pose, and then Shavasana. That was my sequence. And I wasn't thinking it was perfect. Okay, and then in terms of,
I wanted to add something. Sometimes when I feel great resistance to that, or getting on the Peloton, or going for a walk, I say, I'm not going to go downstairs and get on my Peloton. I'm just putting on these exercise clothes. I'm just going downstairs now to the garage. I'm not biking on the Peloton. And then I break it out into steps. So I'm just laying out my yoga mat. That's all.
Yeah.
I'm just getting a bolster right now. That's all. Or a couple blocks. Or I'm just going to put my hands on the wall and do half dog pose. I'm not really doing. And then Mr. Iyengar used to say, do 3. If you really feel resistant, do 3 poses. Because you forget that by the time you're in the middle of the first one.
Yeah. So in terms of teaching a class, when we think we need to do all poses, all types of poses every time, I think that belief gets in our way because it doesn't allow us to go deeply in any direction. Typically, we teach 75, 90 minutes, and it's just not enough time to do everything. It also, I think, downgrades the power of the quieter poses because we don't allow ourselves and our students to go in a quieter direction for half the class because we think we have to get to everything. And it also communicates what I think of as kind of a maximalist approach that we have everywhere in our culture, that more is always better. And I think asana practice is a wonderful place to experience and experiment with minimalism, that less is sometimes nourishing for ourselves and for our students. And the last point on this is something that mom says, which I love as a definition of yoga, is that remember that yoga is a state of being and the practices associated with that state. So when we get too focused on the practices and including all of the practices in the class every time, we forget, I think, or we kind of ignore that our primary goal is to help our students and ourselves to reach that state of yoga.
To remind them, I like to say, to remind them and help them recognize the state of yoga.
Yeah.
That-
Ellen is saying in the chat, I love that she loves what you say, Mom. It's true. This is a great mom quote. I know you can do more, but can you do less?
That's a discipline. All right.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go to point number 3, which is believing every practice needs to be exciting, clever, and entertaining. This is
Oh, no, really, seriously, before you say anything, like I used to think, oh, I have to come up with something new. And I've noticed when I'm training teachers a lot of times, and I kind of experiment, I teach them something. I say, how did you do that again? I want to, like, I want to have something new, something different, something better, something exciting. Instead of just letting your own practice supply it a new insight, and then using it gently in the way that feels right.
Yeah. Mom likes to say the poses haven't changed in 5,000 years.
Not really.
Okay, so when we think that every practice in terms of sequencing needs to be exciting, clever, entertaining, that doesn't serve us in home practice, because simple sequencing is often so satisfying in a home practice. And the analogy I think of is like comfort food, that sometimes we don't want fancy restaurants razzle dazzle food.
Call it stacked food with a drizzle
vertical
around.
food.
Vertical food.
Yeah, sometimes Mom and I agree, like our favorite comfort food is like a can of really good tomato soup and a grilled cheese sandwich. And that when we think that our home practice needs to be exciting, clever, and entertaining, it's like we think we always need to go to a restaurant and have something new and exciting. But often our nervous system is craving the tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwich equivalent, or whatever that is for you. Type into the chat, what is your version of tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwich? I want to see. You're just like
Sunday night when it's raining.
Sunday night, it's raining. You've just come home from travel, mac and cheese, beef and noodles, porridge. Yeah, pasta, kitchery, bread and butter. Yeah, exactly. And then this belief about it needing to be exciting when we teach a class, overcomplication doesn't always serve the students. It's me as the teacher wanting to be fancy and wow them.
Absolutely.
But and this I really like thinking about, especially in our digitally distracted, dopamine addicted, social media addled brains. Repetition / simplicity is soothing. Like our students.
Wait, now say that last part again about repetition.
Repetition / simplicity is soothing. For our digitally distracted, dopamine-addled social media, digitally distracted, dopamine-addled social media addicted brains. We need this repetition, this simplicity. That's what's soothing for our nervous system.
Can I insert a practice that's off the mat about, I double dog dare you. That's a Texas thing we learned growing up. I don't know what it means, but double dog dare is like a sacred thing. I've been trying to do this, and I did this a lot on my trip, 2 flights. I went to Texas to meet with just a few, 55 or 50 relatives, close relatives, is when I would get to my gate, and there maybe be 20 minutes before we started boarding, I would look around and try to find someone who wasn't on their phone.
Not possible.
And I decided not to be on my phone and just to sit there and watch the people. I love to watch people walk because I'm a physical therapist by training. And I love to, oh, that person has tight rotators, just to look around, to see the planes landing, look out the windows, just be there as a spiritual practice. Waiting can be presence. I just want to watch the universe breathe me as a pranayama practice.
At the Houston airport.
At the Houston airport.
So my point number 4, this is my last point, and then Mama's going to do the last 2 points for us today. The mistake, which I've made many times, that we're calling one of our sequencing mistakes, is starting too slowly, which is a little bit what Mom touched on with the idea of starting with Tadasana. But what it risks, I think, when we start too slowly is that we're being too subtle in our shift towards interoceptive awareness. So that's interoception is the real-time reading of what's going on inside of our bodies. And I think that's kind of a sciencey word for what we're doing in asana practice. We're inviting ourselves and our students to pay attention to our interior state in real time. And that shift, it can be, if we start the practice too slowly with small movements, with breathing, with too long of a meditation, it can be too subtle. And it's harder, I think, for ourselves and our students to catch on to that intero. It's too big of a shift from what came. The effect of any pose is related to the pose that came before it. And in the beginning of a practice, the home practice or a class, the pose that came before it is getting into that room. Your life, your parking, your traffic, your work, whatever it was that came before. And so it can be too subtle. The example I was thinking about is like, if we ask our students to do some breathing at the beginning of class and then feel the rise and fall of the kidneys with the breath, that's too subtle at the very beginning, right? Because when we arrive on the mat, at least this is my experience, give a yes in the chat if you relate. When I arrive on the mat, my mind is like dominant and my body is subordinate in terms of my experience, my awareness, the mind and then the body. And what we're doing, the practice helps us shift so that it's like the mind and the body. I'm getting a lot more information, interoceptive real time from the body, and the mind is a little bit more quiet. So I love this. It's what Mama sometimes says, is that yoga, one very simple definition of yoga, we could say, is heart up, head down. And when we start too slowly in terms of sequencing, we're not helping ourselves to make that shift of heart up, head down. Would you agree, Mom?
With myself, yes, I often agree with myself. Not always. The way I like to say it, Mr. Iyengar used to say this. He said, when we come to class, the brain is an extrovert and the body is an introvert. And the practice reverses that. So by the end of class, your brain is an introvert, but your body has become, all day long, our brain is active and our body is constricted. And the asana practice changes that, it reverses that. So the brain steps back and the body flowers open. So I would like, Lizzie, if you're willing, we talked about a question about the order of the standing poses.
Mm-hmm.
We could take that question now. I think it will illustrate this point. I have something to add about it. So is that all right for you? I'm throwing a wrench.
Yeah, absolutely. I have this question from Henry that I'm going to read, and I see there is a Henry. I'm turning on your mic. I think this is the same Henry who's on with us. If you want to just come on and say hello, Henry. But let me read the question.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, is this question from you about standing poses?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So remind us where you're joining from, Henry.
I'm from Santa Cruz.
Yeah. Okay. So Henry writes a question about sequencing in standing poses. I generally first teach 2 to 3 poses where the hips are toward the long edge of the mat, like Trikonasana, Virabhadrasana 2, Parshva Konasana, followed by poses where the hips are towards the short edge of the mat, like Virabhadrasana 1, Parshvottanasana, and Parivrita Trikonasana. Does this seem like a sensible approach to standing poses in sequencing, Judith?
I love this question. So it sounds like to me, or another way of looking at it, Henry, is poses that are opening the hip joints, and then you're more closed. And you're putting those two as two mini sequences within the broader sequences of standing poses. And let me tell you why in sequencing, I so like the standing poses first. If you can walk, you can do standing poses. They use big muscles. They're not subtle joint movements. They're big joint movements. Like if you're doing a twist, any movement is not very great. But when you're doing standing poses, it brings people down from the brain and out into the arms in Trikonasana. And then they move the pelvis and the spine, and everything, the orchestra of the body is playing together, and it's strengthening the legs for back bends, and it's opening the body, and it's moving it. And I love playing with the sequencing of standing poses. This particular standing pose sequence that you mentioned, I've done before, but I also like us to remember the intention with what the intention we're going. And your intention is that I see here is to use the opening poses and then the slightly more introverted standing poses where you're like Prasarita Padottanasana or Parsvottanasana, where you're turning more inward. And I really like that. But another interesting way, just to give you an example of standing poses, imagine that Trikonasana is Tadasana. So sometimes people practice, they do opposed Tadasana. I've been in those classes, but think of Trikonasana as an example because it's so common and so many people use it, and it's almost always at the first of class. It's Tadasana. So you do Trikonasana, then you do another standing pose. Then you do Trikonasana. Then you do another standing pose. Then you do Trikonasana, interspersed 3 or 4 times between these other standing poses. And the cardinal rule of sequencing is the effect of any pose is directly related to the pose that came before it. So each pose, if you're doing a pose, then Tadasana, pose number 2, Tadasana, pose number 3, Tadasana, you're going to experience not only the pose you did before, but Trikonasana is going to radically change from the input of the pose that went before it. And so that's when I do that, I have that intention of focusing on Trikonasana, how it's a living thing, and your body responds differently because of what you just did. It makes it very clear. So, but I like your sequence. I think that does make sense. I think it makes sense intellectually, but I think it makes sense in an embodied sense, because sequencing is what allows the body to make sense of the poses, to integrate the effects of the asana is shaped by it's like water. Water is shaped by its container. So the sequence is the container that allows the nervous system to understand in a nonverbal way and integrate the shifts, both large and small, internal and external, that the sequencing is creating. It makes sense to the body, what you say. So, Henry, how do you feel hearing that answer?
Very interesting. Thank you. I like the idea of Trikonasana being the Tadasana to go back to.
Yes, and sometimes I've also used Prasarita Padottanasana. And it's like putting a different spice in your soup. If you always use the same, you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's a little bit it's drawing the attention of the nervous system in a new way. So thank you so much for your question. And
Thank you.
You're welcome. Should I go to number 5, Lizzie?
I want to say one thing. We're almost ready for that. Thank you, Henry, for your question. Mama loves questions. In the live Zooms that we do for the sequencing course, I hope you will come with many, many questions. There's a little conversation going on in the chat about sun salutations, because you were talking about, you just mentioned, Mom, that you often start with standing poses, or standing poses make sense at the beginning of class. But in a lot of systems, it's really emphasized to start always, or, it's emphasized to start with Surya A, Surya B. How do you think about sun salutation? Because I know in your classes, you don't always teach sun. Sometimes you do. Some days you will do, like if Mom does a retreat and we're doing 6 morning active classes, maybe 1 or 2 of those days we'll start with a sun salutation, but other days we'll start with different things. So how do you think about that balance, Mom?
I don't think about it. I just intuit it. If it's cold, if people are really sluggish and holding a standing pose might be too much, or they've been on airplanes, sometimes I do sun salutations because if I have 5 minutes, 10 minutes, that's got to be my practice. And depending on my energy, I might use sun salutations. But the thing that I would like us to do, if we do sun salutations every time, vary it a little bit, slow it way down, speed it up. Or I know there's systems where obviously where you do the same poses every time. And what I'm going to say about that is what I often say about sun salutation. Every class, before you start the sun salutation, take one part of it and spend 5 minutes with your students, breaking it down, talking about the alignment, how when you're like in a up plank, arms straight, you don't want to sag and hang into your shoulders, but you want to lift and slightly round the back, and that recruits the abs, and you get good alignment for that. And you talk about that specific piece of the sun salutation or the flow, and then you go back to your flow, because we don't just want to use sequencing to put our students through their paces. We want to use our sequencing and our sun salutation and our entire practice to teach people how to practice. We're not just giving them an experience of yoga. I think this is my philosophy. Opinion alert. We're teaching them how to practice, because once they know how to practice, then they're going to do it. They're going to own it as theirs, not just something you give them or you put them through when they go in this one room and they associate their practice with going to class. When I know that someone is practicing every day or almost every day, I consider them a more advanced student, even if the poses are very simple, because they've made the yoga their own. They've integrated it into their own life. And one of the ways you do that is you show them, this is a perfect example, not hanging in up, in plank pose or upward dog like this. You show them just a couple simple alignment things, and then go back to your flow if that's what your teaching is about. So teach them how to practice.
Yes. Okay, there's 2 comments I must read from the chat. Allison says, most of my students are either seniors or have replaced knees, hips, shoulders, and other limitations. I offer loads of alternatives and almost always start with lying down position to come to the earth. I observe their movement and hear their comments as they enter class and adjust my teaching to accommodate their needs on that day.
Namaste to you. I love that. But why don't we all do that? Not necessarily start lying down, but teach people, not poses. Who is in your class today? I remember many years ago, I was teaching in Hawaii. Someone had to go there and teach. It was, and everybody in the class could do lotus pose. Well, that rarely happens in the States. And maybe it's the warm water. I don't know what it is. And so we just started doing all these poses in lotus because, it was so much fun because everyone could do it. So
Yeah.
feeling your students, listening to them, seeing them, observing them, and don't be afraid to start on a path and realize it's not working. Well, that's not working. Let's do this.
Well, I'll say for me, why we don't do that, why I don't always teach people and I'm more teaching poses, is I sometimes use my sequence. I often write it out. I have my little list of what I'm teaching when I go to class, and I use it a little bit like an armor or something, like a protection, like when I feel anxious about teaching or nervous about, and so, or I have my little sequence written out and then I hold on to that and it feels safe somehow. And it was much stronger, this feeling, when I was a beginning teacher, but I still definitely feel this. And if I go in without a list of what I'm going to teach and I'm just trying to feel the room, I guess I would feel more anxious. Does anyone relate to that in the chat? I guess I would feel exposed. That's why I'm saying armor, like naked, like somehow.
I have a solution, Lizzie.
Yeah.
Teach for 51 years. You know how some people like go to make something, to cook something, and for me, when I'm cooking a new thing, I always follow the recipe exactly, and that's the last time I ever follow it. And then some people, some amazing cooks, just, what have you got? And they say, you do this, you go to your refrigerator and it looks like just not much to me. And you pull out all these things and you create this wonderful thing. That's what I do when I teach. Like I go in there, I have an idea, like maybe back bends.
Mm-hmm.
I have nothing against and support people who want a list, but I've had a list and I have never followed it. It's this, you know what it is? It's the starting. Like today, I want them to end up with a lot of forward bends and just dropping the chin, going in, supported forward bends on it or whatever. I want this kind of feeling for them today. What do I need to do to get them ready for that? But whatever you need to do, if you need to do a list, I know a teacher who had someone stand at the back of the class with a big sign of listing the poses and would hold it up for the teacher.
I mean, for me, it's also, I think the list is connected to that belief that I need to teach something clever and exciting and new. Yes. So I'm trying, that the movement we do at the very beginning of class then is like a piece of music that then that motive, and then that repeats in the back, like I'm trying to kind of,
it's a choreography. Teaching a class is becoming a choreographer. And I've learned that you could do something and then 2 or 3 things and then go back and do the first part of it, like do a back bend that they think is a back bend, and then do some more back bends, deeper ones, sequencing, and then go back and do the simple one that they thought was hard. And I said, has the pose changed? And they go, it's completely changed. And that's when I always say, no, it hasn't. You've changed. And that's a self-reflection technique. Lizzie, we need to move to number 5.
I know, but I need to read one more thing from the chat. We're going to end on time, I promise. 12 minutes. Okay, I just love this from Sasha, and I just want your 1-sentence reaction, Mom. Okay. Sasha writes, sometimes I don't use a strict form of yoga and spend more time relaxing my body while I do yoga. Is this not a good idea?
It is a very lovely idea. Very lovely.
I think we're all too strict with ourselves, or many of us are very,
well,
very
discipline strict. Discipline is about consistency. It's not about force. That's a huge thing we mix up. I'm going to make myself disciplined if I stay here for 2 minutes. All right. That's not what discipline is. Discipline is consistently stepping on the mat. Maybe your practice is just to step on the mat and take 5 aware breaths and honor the ancestors. And then that changes your day. There's no such thing as too little yoga. There is too much. All right.
Point number 5.
You want to read it?
Yes. Point number 5 is doing too much and running out of time and rushing through the quieting poses.
Yeah. The poses that I like to think of active and restorative poses, and the poses that seem fun and interesting and more important are when we're busy doing something. But yoga is a state of being, and the practices associated with it. So the asana is not the yoga. It points towards the state of yoga. Through integration and silence, allowing the space for silence. So if we think we have to give more movements, we have to keep moving, we have to keep doing, we're not allowing this second part of yoga. The practices are not, asana isn't the yoga. It points toward the state of yoga inside ourselves. So we need always, I believe, especially in our culture, in our modern culture, because today it's not just about stress anymore. People are exhausted by the pandemic, by politics, by the world situation, by the wars that are going on, by many things. And they need the movement and the stretching and the encouragement to let go that can then crescendo into a deep sense of quietness and silence. We need at least one pose transition in which the focus is on stillness. I think we desperately need to remind our students that stillness and presence, like happiness, can never be achieved from the outside, can only be remembered and recognized from the inside. So we need that transitional time where you've been doing all these things and then you sit down and you do a supported forward bend, or you do Supta Baddha Konasana, or you do a restorative pose. I think it's not a waste of time. I believe it is the opposite. I believe it is modeling for the student the healing nature of presence and stillness, from which that is the foundation from which we can live our yoga in the world. From that presence. That's what changes people's lives. Not handstand lotus in the center of the room. Because I've done it. And you know what happened after I did it? Nothing. All right. Shall we go to number 6?
Yes, number 6 is skipping Savasana. Why is this a sequencing mistake, Mom?
Because I say it is. Savasana is teaching people a life skill. I have 3 points on this. Teaching them that relaxation doesn't have to happen by taking a pill or any other substance. It's that you have within you the ability to let go. And no one in their lives will give them permission to rest. It gives them the body physiologically and with the nervous system and the energetics of the pose, the subtle energies, the nadis, not just the nerves, a chance to exhale metaphorically, to give up doing and serving and thinking and acting and allow yourself to sink into the comfort of being. You are enough, just lying there in Shavasana, silently being and being consciousness, recognizing consciousness, tasting, smelling, feeling the conscious presence of the moment. That is the most healing thing we can do on every single level, because what we're doing is we're seeing that thoughts are not consciousness. It's that first understanding I ever had was in my first Shavasana. Such a blessing. First, I didn't understand why we were lying there. I kept looking around at first, like, what are we doing? Why aren't we doing those fun shapes? But then after I got there, I realized that I was somewhere beneath thought, that thoughts were different, that I had thoughts, but It's that differentiation, that disidentification with thought, which is moksha, which is freedom, which is the state of yoga. Yoga, chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is from the Sutta Patanjali. It's that's the first taste. When people understand a differentiation from their thoughts, they have turned into yogis. That's what it's all about. We need to integrate the learning experience of the asana and learning on all levels, in the body, in the cells, in the mind, in the nervous system, in the emotions, so that what is now, the waters are still, so what shines out is true being. And that is, and your class is probably the only place they're going to do it. And it is the greatest gift you can give them. I'm waving the flag of Savasana.
Judith Hanson Lasater.
Into a frenzy of excitement about doing nothing. It is critical in our world. Don't give them 5 minutes. Give them a minimum of 15 to 20. Cover their eyes, support their knees, cover them up. Like, don't talk the whole time. Shocking, but true. I actually shut up occasionally. Let them settle into their own being. And then the other thing, what I've started doing the last, 6 or 8 years, is when we're done, I ask people not to speak until they walk out the door. And people tell me that they felt really the calmness from Savasana all the way home. And then they got home and opened the door to their 5 kids. But because what we practice, we need to live. That's when it has power.
Judith Hanson Lasater, Savasana enthusiast.
Yeah.
I would love to see in the chat from every single person who's with us now, what is the number one thing that you heard today that you needed to hear?
That's a great thing. I want to read that too.
What's your takeaway from this session? There was also a question about what is Stonehenge Savasana, Mom's book, Restore and Rebalance. That's where you're going to find that pose. Or in this course, the sequencing course.
They got a lot.
Less is more. It's your practice. Teach them how to practice. Asana is not the yoga. Teach the student. I know you can do more, but can you do less? I am enough. My practice is just right for me. Savasana teaches us a life skill. Simplicity is soothing. Heart up, head down. Teach people, not poses. These are great. Trust your intuition and read the room. I like that, Gina.
Yeah, I said that, didn't I, or did you?
I don't think you said read the room, but that's what landed with Gina.
Yeah,
that's what I love about teaching. Tune in, teach people, not poses. Yoga is a state of being. Shavasana, heart, heart, heart. Lisa says Shavasana, shut up. Oh, so good.
Someone said, I'm talking to their brain and they said, dear brain, shut up. Thank you.
All right, let me share my screen last minute together. These are our 6 sequencing mistakes. Thank you so much for being here with us. This is the email address once again. If you have any questions about joining the course, lasater.yoga@gmail.com. And if you want to go look at the sequencing course that we're starting on December 6th with a live session with Mom, similar to this, but it'll be a smaller group and you'll be able to ask more questions. I want to remind you that 7 days from now, and if you use this coupon MAGIC, you're going to get the special pre-enrollment discount. I also wanted to remind you there's a video here, which I'm not going to play now, but it's 3 minutes. You can go watch that and it'll give you more of a sense of what's inside of the course once you enroll. The course is not available yet. That's why it's pre-enrollment. It's all up there, uploaded, waiting, and I'm going to turn it on probably on December 5th. Is there anyone? Give a yes in the chat if anyone's already enrolled in the course. Is anyone planning on joining us? Yes, enrolled, says Keith. Okay, yes. Lots of people. Okay, so that I'm going to turn that all on the 5th, and then we'll all gather together on the 6th for our kind of kickoff class with Mom. I want to share 2 other websites. The lasater.yoga one, That's where you can find the course. And then this is where you can find everything that Mom is doing. If you go to the shortcut www.judith.yoga, you can get on her newsletter, etc. And I'm at lizzie.yoga. You can find, I send a newsletter every Sunday. And I'm doing the whole month of December, every Sunday in December, I'm giving a little free gift in my newsletter. So you might want to subscribe just for that. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Mama, for sharing your 52 years of practice and teaching with us all. We are so grateful.
I want to say that I didn't have a business partner, so I decided to grow one and pop her out into the world. And I enjoy having you as a daughter, and of course, and I enjoy having you as a partner in yoga. It is an unexpected blessing in my life. And I want to thank all of you for all your acts, seen and unseen, known and unknown, appreciated and not appreciated, that help the world to become a better place through your kindness and your awareness. You are doing a great and important work in this life.
Absolutely.
You've been called, I think yoga teaching is a calling. You've been called to do great work. We're not great, but our work is very important.
And we're so lucky because we get to do it barefoot.
Love across the skies and appreciation.
Love
There
you,
is
Mama.
goodness and light in the world. It doesn't seem like it, but there is definitely goodness and light, and goodness and light always wins.
Love you all. Bye, Mama. Love you.